Throughout your life, you will inevitably face extremely challenging situations. Perhaps you are even experiencing some of them right now. Know that this is not unique to you. It is a common experience for all of us. Sometimes we delude ourselves into creating the false idea that life should be filled only with happy and pleasant moments. However, there will come a time when we encounter circumstances that will test us to the limit. Nevertheless, looking on the bright side, as human beings, we possess the ability to exert some control over our emotions. This allows us to confront challenges more effectively and with less suffering. But it is important to remember that this ability does not make the task easy. Remarkably, throughout our lives, no one effectively teaches us how to manage our emotions. This is why I am sharing this message today. I will delve into the concept of temperance, one of the 4 historical virtues. To illustrate, I would like to share a story. Once, a king summoned the wise men of his court and asked them to create a precious ring with a diamond provided by one of the finest jewelers in the region. Inside this ring, he wanted to conceal some words that would assist him in his most difficult moments. A message he could turn to in times of despair. Furthermore, he wished for this message to benefit not only his future heirs, but also the descendants of those heirs. However, this message had to be concise enough to fit within the diamond of the ring. All who heard the king's desires were scholarly sages who could have easily penned extensive treatises. However, crafting a message of only 2 or 3 words that would fit within a diamond was an extraordinary challenge. They devoted hours of deep research in their philosophical books, but found nothing that aligned with the king's wishes. The king had a beloved servant, a man who had served his father and cared for him during difficult times, such as when his mother passed away. This servant was treated as a member of the family and held in high regard. The king decided to consult this servant as well. The servant humbly said, "I am not a sage, scholar, or academic, but I know the message. As you may know," he continued, "throughout my long life in the palace, I have encountered people of diverse natures. On one occasion, I met a master who was a guest of your father. I was in his service, and when he departed, he gave me this message as a gesture of gratitude." At that moment, the elderly servant wrote the mentioned message on a tiny piece of paper, folded it, and handed it to the king, saying, "Do not read it now. Keep it hidden within the ring and open it only when you find yourself in a situation with no way out." It did not take long for that moment to arrive. The country was invaded, and his kingdom was threatened. The king fled on horseback to preserve his life while his enemies pursued him relentlessly. He found himself in a desperate situation, alone and surrounded by enemies at a precipice with a deep valley before him. There was no turning back as the enemy blocked his path. He could hear the galloping of horses, their voices, and their nearness. It was then that he remembered the ring. He retrieved the paper, unfolded it, and discovered an immensely valuable message for that moment. "This too shall pass." At that moment, he realized that a profound silence enveloped him. The pursuers had apparently become lost in the forest or had taken the wrong path. But the fact remained that immense silence surrounded him. He no longer heard the galloping of horses. The king felt profoundly grateful to the servant and the unknown master. Those words had worked like a miracle. He folded the paper, placed it back in the ring, gathered his army, and reclaimed his kingdom. On the day of victory, the city celebrated with grand festivities, music, and dance, and the king felt a deep sense of pride. Once again, the elderly servant at his side said, "Dear king, it is time for you to read the message within the ring." The king inquired, "What do you mean? I am currently experiencing a moment of euphoria and joy. People are celebrating my return. We have defeated the enemy." The servant replied, "This message is not solely for desperate situations, but also for joyful ones. It is not just for when you feel defeated, but also when you feel victorious. It is not limited to the final moments, but also to the initial ones." The king opened the ring and read the message, "This too shall pass." Once more, he felt the same tranquility and silence amidst the crowd that celebrated and danced. However, his pride and ego had vanished. The king fully comprehended the message. Suffering and joy are fleeting, just as day and night. The elderly servant continued, "Remember that everything is transient. No event or emotion is permanent. Just as there are moments of joy and moments of sorrow, accept them as part of the duality of nature, for they are intrinsic to the very nature of things." One of the keys to mastering our emotions is to understand and remember that what we are feeling at this moment will not last forever. Do you know anyone who has never experienced happiness or someone who has never felt sadness? In both cases, those emotions do not endure throughout life. Good and bad things happen. When going through a sad moment, it helps to accept and understand that sadness will pass. Acceptance does not mean resignation, passivity, or agreement with what is happening. It simply means acknowledging that many things that happen to us are beyond our control. Acceptance leads us to proactivity, making us aware of whether we can do something or change our situation. In that case, all our energy and intention should be directed toward that goal. When we accept something, we are more capable of moving forward. Similarly, we should not be carried away in moments of happiness. It is fine to enjoy them, but in moderation, without letting euphoria make us forget that those moments will also pass. People who forget this are never prepared to face difficult situations in life. They live in a bubble that will eventually burst. Life teaches us to savor the moment but never forget the reality of life. Just as we suffer in difficult situations but do not allow ourselves to be consumed by uncontrolled sadness, this is temperance. The story I mentioned earlier only addresses two emotions, joy and sadness. However, temperance applies to any emotion. No emotion becomes positive when taken to the extreme. On the other hand, nearly any emotion, when managed in moderation, can bring something positive. Even negative emotions, when controlled with temperance, allow us to extract valuable lessons for our lives. In the words of Seneca, temperance is a virtue that involves mastering and moderating impulses and desires so that they do not lead us to excess or deficiency. In the words of Epictetus, temperance is a pleasing harmony of feelings resulting from a life in which desires are controlled and reason is the guide. And in the words of Marcus Aurelius, temperance is the virtue that helps us govern and direct our passions and desires, avoiding extremes and maintaining a balanced and moderate life.